It was like sales is communication, but then again, like communication is sales because what is sales fundamentally is like, yeah, you're communicating value and you're guiding people along and influencing them to make the best decisions for them. You know, like your job as a salesman is not to get someone to buy. Your job as a salesman is to help them decide what the best choice is for them.
Correct.
To achieve the goals that they want, to resolve their pain, to solve their problems.
Absolutely.
So from that perspective, like, yeah, no, like everything is sales. Like that's really how you convey value in the world. So fun fact, Elon Musk is no longer the richest person in the world.
Really?
According to Forbes, this is a couple weeks ago, just at the beginning of the month, we now have Bernard Arnault. He's the owner and CEO of Louis Vuitton.
Really?
Yeah. So that's actually super interesting because like right now, this is also just according to Forbes, he's got a net worth of $213.7 billion. Just kind of stupid, but yeah, pocket change. And then this brokey, Elon Musk, 178.3 billion. What a loser, right? Weeks. but it's super interesting to see the dynamics of that change over the last year or so, just since we've kind of had like sort of towards the end of like the macro bull market for like tech and like software and innovative growth companies, and sort of as that's kind of bottomed out, or started to top out and headed downwards, you got all these like tech billionaires like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates losing like tens, sometimes hundreds of billions of dollars in net worth.
Yeah, like why?
Because the perceived value of their company through like the stock market drops, you know? So
Yeah.
it's all not real. A lot of the net worth too for companies like that is based off of like market cap, which is sometimes based off of these weird multiples as what you could theoretically sell it for, you know? So like, let's say a company is making, let's just keep it simple. Like, let's say a company makes $1 million a year, right? A lot of times you wouldn't buy the company for like $1 million a year because it's worth more than that, because now it's a cash flow asset, right? So you'd probably buy it on some multiple of your revenue or EBITDA or your cash flow, like your profits and things like that. So if you're making like $1 million in like profitable cash flow, you might sell it at like a 5x to 10x multiple because it's perceived to be worth that much. You know, like I'd pay $5 million to buy something that generates me $1 million every year consistently in perpetuity, right? So a lot of times the net worth thing is based on those kind of multiples. So it's like all very not real. Like no one has hundreds of billions of dollars in their bank account. Just not a thing.
Not that we know about.
Maybe the oil princes, but no one like really has that. It's all like IOUs and debt. So the theoretical, in theory, richest man is now VP. As in, if he were to sell all of his assets, he could in theory have that money, but no one's gonna buy it. But whatever. But yeah. So like I think I saw that when everyone else was losing like tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars,
Yeah.
he only lost like 7 billion in the same market conditions, right?
Sure.
Which is super interesting that his business that he made, just selling like ultra luxury, like perceived value, like elitist purses, posturing purses, basically, you know, it's like that and has maintained and a lot of value through these kinds of like recession type market conditions, right?
Why do you think those things hold value like that compared to like a tech company stock?
Well, it's just a lot of it has to do, I think, with the sentiment of where people think value is and where it's going. Like a lot of times, the reason tech companies and high innovation growth companies will have such explosive growth is because people are speculating. It's not based on any like actual value, like any like real product. Like they're not actually providing a product, but people are guessing on where it could go, right? And you got all these like venture capitalist money in there as well, and so you end up with these facades of value almost. I'm not saying they're not valuable, but it's based on like what you think other people will think about it in the future, so you can just sell it at a higher price. That's kind of like where a lot of like these like super crazy market valuations will come from. But something like Louis Vuitton as like a luxury good, it's targeting a different market. It's targeting a different type of person. It's solving like a rich person's problem. So you can charge rich people prices for it, right? Like no one needs a purse that costs $10,000, right? A lot of people think they do, and they'll buy it because it makes them feel rich and look elite, but no one really needs that, right? So it's just solving a status problem. And that's kind of fundamentally what it is. It's a different type of business, and so it becomes more evergreen. Because like the rich people, rich people are still going to be rich even in a recession, well, by and large. You know, like they're not going to comparatively, they're not going to change their overall lifestyle just because, ooh, the S&P lost 5%. Oh no, like they're not worried about their IRAs and their retirement accounts. You know, like it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
So like $10,000 per person, it's like not that's not a lot, really. You know, and so also just you kind of have that aspect, and then something like Louis Vuitton and this guy has this Bernard Arnault guy has like absolute conviction that his product is the best, and it's made of the best materials, best quality, most elitist. He's just the best, right? And so he's targeting those ultra rich people, right? And he's been able to communicate the value and solve a very specific problem that has nothing to do with boom and bust tech cycles.
So he's communicating the value in a way that makes his product seem more valuable to the people he's communicating
100%. The value is, I think, 90% in the communication, right? Because if you look at the materials, oh, it's some nice leather. Oh, it's some cool stitching. Maybe they don't use a sweatshop. Who knows? Like, you know, like there's things that you can kind of like throw in there as like why the item itself is valuable or non-valuable. But is it really $10,000? No.
Right.
Why do you buy $10,000? It's status. You don't buy the thing. You buy the status that it communicates. He's selling communication of value. He's selling communication of perceived wealth and status, right? That's really the product that's there.
Yeah.
Right? So it's multiple layers. Like he's not only just communicating and really good at persuading people to think that his thing is actually elitist and valuable, but he's selling it because it will allow them to communicate to other people that they're elitist and valuable, right? So it's really just this game of communication of value that's really being played there.
That's fascinating. Because then, like, somebody with a Louis Vuitton sells purses, right, is now, on paper, wealthier than, you know, somebody like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, who have literally, like, Amazon, SpaceX, like that
like
type
solving
of product.
Real problems of supply chain and actually doing things with real product. I was like, oh, this guy has a luxury brand and sells $10,000 purses to, like, not that many people. Like, no, like, I don't know about you, but like, I don't know many people who actually have like Louis Vuitton stuff. And if they do, it's like one thing. It's not like a huge thing, but everyone orders Amazon like every day.
I know. That's crazy to think about that. But it's just that perceived value discrepancy in what he sells is so large that people will pay that.
100%.
That's crazy.
It's an interesting thing to study too, as like, if you're trying to figure out like, oh, how can I communicate value, or how can I like make my product more valuable? I can make myself more valuable. Like, well, you kind of start to study like a luxury brand and like what kind of energy they put off, what they're going for, who they serve, what they like stand firm on, what they care about, what they don't care about. And it just kind of like shows you like, oh, this is how you can do a lot with a little, right? It's a very like high leverage brand, you know, like he's positioned himself in a way that he does. He only, I don't know, it might cost only like maybe $100 to make that purse, but he sells it for $10,000. That's crazy. Like the margins on that are stupid, you know? So that's a high leverage product for him to sell, right?
Yeah.
And so being able to kind of study how that communication happens is I think very valuable to anyone just kind of looking to like just up their game in life, in their own brands or anything.
Yeah. Well, dude, communication is like
everything.
That's such a like a universally applicable skill, because that's how humans interact. Like just in general, right? So it's like that's such a high leverage skill to be able to be good and efficient and effective at communicating, because that's any job that you'll ever have, anything you ever do in life like revolves around some level of communication between people. Unless you live on like a deserted island and you're the only one there, like then which other skills become more valuable, obviously. But for most people, like communication is arguably one of the most valuable skills that you can have.
100%. Like humans are social species. We're social animals. You can't have social without communication because that's how you interact. Verbal, nonverbal, body language, written, everything is just a level of communication, right? And fundamentally, like, well, let me ask you this, like, what do you think, like, fundamentally that means, like, communication? What's the point? What does that mean to you?
Of communication?
Yeah.
Well, it's getting something, well, I think it's getting something that's in your head into somebody else's head. Like the thought and the idea that's in your mind into somebody else's mind.
Exactly right. No, that's
see it the way that you're seeing it.
Exactly my perspective on communication as well. Just idea transfer.
Yeah.
I have an idea that I generated or I received, or it's somehow hit my brain, and I have to get it into your brain, into other people's brains, at an individual scale, or at a mass scale. I have to somehow get it into all your brains, and it's got to be close enough to where we're all on the same page. We can actually like work together towards the same goal, because that's really the only way humans can survive, historically, evolutionarily, and even like as we move forward and advance as a species and civilization, we can't do anything alone.
Yeah,
realistically, you just can't. You can't make anything bigger. You can't advance, really. So you need your tribe, you need your community to all be aligned with you towards a common goal to leverage all of our skills together and make something happen, right? So that idea that's transferred needs to be the same, right? And this is where you get into these like tricky situations with like language barriers, like not just between people that speak a different language, but I mean between people who speak the same language, but their internal dictionaries are not quite aligned. Right? Because if I say something and it means something different to you, your internal dictionary maybe interprets that a different way because of whatever experiences, contexts, things that you've read, whatever. That idea that's now in your head is going to mean something different than what I intended.
It's like the game telephone.
It's 100% the same thing. That's why this game is so fun, is because we don't all have internal dictionary or the same internal dictionaries, and we aren't able to communicate and interpret things predictably and equivalently.
Yeah.
And that causes a lot of problems sometimes.
Well, and that's why too, like the tools that you use to communicate are so valuable in that language is just a tool of communication, right? It's a way to get what's in my head into your head. It's something that we've developed over a long period of time, but it's a verbal form of communication, right? So the better you can become at utilizing that tool, the more well-rounded you can develop that tool, the more of that tool you can develop, like the more words you start to understand, like the broader your vocabulary, the better you can start to structure sentences, the better you can utilize that tool, the more effective you are at getting what's in your head into somebody else's head more accurately. Like the translation becomes more accurate, the better you can utilize that tool. But then also, that tool is not going to be 100% accurate all the time. So that's where having other tools come into play too, like nonverbal communication skills, like inflection, body language, other things that are outside of just the words themselves can help to communicate and convey ideas beyond just like the context of the word. Like they provide context to the word.
Body language is super important too, because you're absolutely right. It provides enough context. And this is why spoken language, like face-to-face, is probably the easiest to make sure you're getting an idea across accurately, because that's what we've evolved with. That's what we have practice with. That's what we can really we can work with. And body language provides a lot of intention, right? Which is often lost in, I mean, video is at least better, but like text, written word, things like that. I mean, how often have you sent a text to someone and they're just like, they completely misinterpret it? They don't even know what you're talking about. You can see he's like having a great day, wonderful time. And you see their message, oh, awesome, K. And then now they're just like, the other person is probably like crying because I always said K, he doesn't care about me. Or if it was
instead of a K.
Yeah, you know, it's like, what do you mean? It's like, no, dude, that's a special K. That's a cereal box.
Like, yeah, 100%.
They're right. The inflections and the body language and all those are well, I guess it's a verbal cue, inflection is, but like a non-content cue.
Yeah. Yeah.
provides the context of intention, which is massive, because intention is really what people work off of. Like realistically, like you can say some stupid stuff, you can do some stupid stuff, but as long as people believe that your intention is aligned with theirs, or at least in a good place, which just means aligned with their goals, then they'll cut you so much slack because they see you trying. It's the effort. It's like the effort is like for effort. Effort is the universal language of respect. Like that's kind of where that comes from. And a lot of times I think that's based on the perceived intention, right? Because if they see you trying, it's like, well, that comes with some like caveat. You can't just be trying anything. You have to be trying something aligned with my goals for me to respect you.
Interesting.
I don't know. That's just an idea I thought of just now, but because I've always heard like effort is the universal language of respect, but I don't think that's enough. You know, like effort towards what?
Effort towards what? Yeah, it has to be something that that person also values, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Perceive that effort is valuable.
Right.
To respect it, I guess.
But aside intention, like you can do whatever you want basically, and like you can completely mess up, but as long as they believe you're genuinely aligned with their goals, then it's like, oh,
exactly. Well, and that's a big thing too, of like the disconnect of why sometimes language isn't effective, like why the communication gets muddied sometimes, is because people have different perspectives. People come from different backgrounds. People understand the world differently than each other, and so their reference point is a little bit different. There's an interview question that I was asked in my very first job I ever had in like high school. I was so there was an outdoor shopping mall.
love those.
And there was this little train that drove around. Well, you know, I've seen it. And there's a train that drove around it, and kids could ride on the train, and we drive around the little shopping mall outdoors.
Yeah.
And I drove the train. Like, that was my very first job in high school. So I drove this train around the shopping mall. And of course, I was like technically a customer service representative. So I like was at a customer service desk and like helped people with problems and told people where stores were and stuff like that. But I drove a train. It was dope. So one of the interview questions that I got asked when I was applying for that job was, describe the color yellow to a blind person. And I now ask this when I'm interviewing people, because I think it's such a great question for a couple of different reasons. And I'm curious if they asked me that, knowing these reasons, or if it was just like, this is a fun question.
Yeah, you got to throw in like a random question there to kind of like lighten the mood or whatever. Like, oh, describe the color yellow.
It's a deep one, because the reason that I like it is that you have to describe something to somebody who has a very different perspective and reference on the world than you do, right? If I'm going to describe the color yellow, normally I would use words like bright or sunny, like the sun, right? But it's like,
yeah, you have an analogy like, oh, it's like this thing.
They're blind.
You can point to a lemon.
Yeah, the color of a lemon. It's like they can't see.
It's like how a lemon tastes.
They don't have... Well, yeah, but see, you have to start to apply stuff into their world, where it's like, okay, what are their reference points? What do they understand? And then how can I take what I know and give it to them in a way that they can understand?
Right, 100%.
And so you have to describe it like either tactile, like it's, something they can feel, something they can smell or taste or whatever, or a feeling that they can imagine, like exciting.
Is there a sound that goes with yellow? Like maybe like a saxophone?
Loud, really high-pitched, maybe?
Like a light, like a light saxophone. It's kind of yellow,
I'm thinking about like when a kid's learning to play the trumpet, dude, and he's like, it's like screaming at him. That's like a nice bright yellow.
And that's more like a green vibe to me. I don't know, but
really.
I don't know.
Dude, we're going to like savant level. We can speak, hear colors.
I smell purple.
But anyway, the point of that question is like, can you relate to somebody who's on a completely different perspective than you? Can you put it in their terms? Can you put it in their shoes? And that's so big. And that's why I really like questions.
That's huge to be able to do that, or even be aware of that. Like, honestly, if I'm asking that question in an interview, I don't really care what the answer is, like realistically. But again, kind of going back to the intention, like I care that they tried. I care that they understood that, oh, I have to put this in someone else's perspective, and I can't use my perspective.
Yeah.
Like that's like the single tool I'd say that's the starting point for like, how do you even get better at communicating? It's oh, I have to understand your internal dictionary. I have to at least try to understand your perspective, your reference points, and what you interpret. Like, I have to have enough background data to kind of come up with a model for how you interpret things so that I can say the right things that I think will correspond to the right idea. And that might not be the things that correspond to the right idea in my head, right? Like, if I'm describing yellow to a blind person, it's not going to be how I would interpret yellow or someone would describe yellow to me. But I have to recognize that. And if I'm asking that question to someone, I want a response that shows me that they at least subconsciously get that idea. Even if they're not able to articulate it like we are right now, I want them to be able to understand it. And that's like the key to, I think, getting better at communicating, is being aware and seeking to understand other people's perspectives and reference points, to put yourself in their internal dictionary with whatever database they have and be able to work with that.
Totally. Which is why, so like a job field that involves a lot of communication. And
real quick before we move on, what was your answer?
What was my answer? I don't remember.
All right, we'll do it right now. We're running it live.
Okay. Yellow is, it's exciting. It's like stimulating. It's upbeat. And like, if I was to maybe dive into like the feel thing, it's kind of like prickly, but not like painfully sharp. So it's like stimulating and
I would probably
awakening.
Yeah, I'd probably like a light, like a slightly kind of penetrating warmth.
Okay, yeah, but not that so warm that it's orange.
Right, like not like overwhelming warmth. That's why it's like a light penetration, but it's just like a little bit of.
But it's very light.
Yeah, like light and stimulating, exciting warmth.
Yes. So it's like that feeling when you first find out something exciting news, that initial like, ooh, like that's exciting, like that kind of feeling, like that's yellow.
Interesting.
You could, if you want to go maybe like taste, it's like a little sour, like sours kind of make you like a lemon. That's probably why lemon's yellow. I mean, I don't know, but that type of thing. That's kind of how I would describe it, I think.
Like a sweet and sour. Well, sweet and sour is almost like an orange to me.
Yeah. So because
like a little more on the sour side.
Yeah, more on the sour side. Like it's a very exciting, stimulating color.
Interesting. Yeah, that's so fascinating to just kind of go through that. Like, just
it's a fun exercise. Like it's fun to think about,
because you can't. As soon as you think like, oh, it's gonna be bright. It's bright. It's like, oh, but I can use warm because I can feel. So that's actually super underrated kind of interview question. I think it's gonna be interesting.
Every time.
That's awesome. Do you always use yellow? Have you tried any other colors?
Actually, I always use yellow, just because.
Interesting.
I don't know. I've just also because I can standardize it, so I can see people's definition of the same thing.
Do you want to standardize that kind of question?
But it would be interesting to just try different colors. I've just always picked yellow. I haven't used it a bajillion times. I've used it a handful of times. But.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see in the future, like what other kinds of questions like that. See if you can kind of like pick some kind of avatar that clearly has a drastically different set of either sensory inputs or other kind of internal dictionary things going on, and try to describe something to that,
Dude, like, that's actually interesting, coming from maybe people who like train dogs or something. Some people are like really good at like training animals.
Oh, yeah. I feel like
would be really good at this type of communication because they can't talk at all.
Yeah.
Like someone who's really good at training animals probably has this figured out. I'd be curious if we should bring somebody like that. That would be cool. Anyway, I think like one of the job fields, I guess, that is most associated with like communication like this is sales, obviously, because sales and copywriting, you are literally having to communicate value to people.
Right.
And because of that, and this, a little bit of a hot take, but I think this is something that's been definitely catching on recently in the sales world, is like one of the most valuable ways to approach sales is through a lens of empathy. Most people, when they hear like sales, they have the sort of stereotypical person in their mind of this like sleazy, really like aggressive, assertive, salesperson, right?
Misinterpreted, and I think it's kind of always been this, because it's never been about that. Like, I know people say like, oh, that's like the old timey sales. Like, it's never really been about that. sales, it's not about persuasion. It's not about influence. Like, it is, but that's not the core job that you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. So like when I'm thinking about like I've had a definition that I like is like sales is a transfer of belief or transfer of conviction over a bridge of trust. Right. So you have to have the conviction in whatever you're selling. You have to genuinely believe that it's a good thing, helpful thing. This is the best thing for you. Right. Just like Bernard Arnault and about Louis Vuitton, like he has conviction that his product is the best quality, the most elitist. He has a conviction, and he's transferring it to you over a bridge of trust. So I have to build trust with you, so I can have something to walk.
So you believe what I say?
Yeah, to communicate with you, and then I have to actually have the conviction to give to you. If I'm missing one of those things, I can't sell. Yeah. So that's kind of like a base kind of
definition.
Yeah, working definition and understanding of like how sales works and what it is.
Mine, I like that was similar. I think it's it's using like effective communication to convey value, essentially, or
100% that.
You could even say to change somebody's perspective or belief potentially, but more so just to convey value. But it's using effective communication because, again, like that's how you transfer an idea from your head to somebody else's head.
100%.
And so that's where like the idea of empathy comes in, because that's not something that you would normally think of when you think of like traditional sales, right?
But it's the only thing that's necessary, really.
Because again, like you said earlier, it's like you have to come from a place of seeking to understand. You have to know what that person, the prospect, how they think, what their world is like, so that you can offer them something that they actually need and they actually want. Because they're coming to you with a problem of some kind. Otherwise, why are they there? And you have to seek to understand their pain, essentially, in how they understand it. Because they might have this problem and you'll be like, oh, that's not that bad. I've been there. It's like this, and you just do this and it's done. But it's like, to them, that might be the worst thing in the world, and they feel so differently about it. You have to understand where they're coming from and how they feel about the world, how they see things, so that you can start communicating in their language, right? In the way that they see the world. Just like the blind person, you have to describe yellow in the way that they understand. You have to now describe your product, your service, your whatever, in a way that they understand and resonates with them.
100%.
But before you can do that, you have to understand their world. So you have to be empathetic. You have to listen and ask questions.
Yeah.
And like listening, learning how to really listen is the first step in communicating well.
Mm-hmm.
People think communication is talking.
No.
Communication is listening. Like that's the root.
It's just about, again, going back to this idea of leverage, like listening is fundamentally the start point, because you have to download their internal dictionary. Right?
Yep.
I have to download the words that they use. I have to download the perspectives, the reference points they have, so that then I can leverage all of that and my skill and knowledge and experience as a salesman to say one thing that communicates the most value, because it's piercing them. Because I now have the context and everything I need to design the most piercing thing that I can leverage everything I know, so that I put in a little bit of input and then guide them to the best decision for them, and actually provide that value and actually convey that value and actually solve their problem.
Yeah. And it's going to be more meaningful for them too, because you're getting down to the root of their issue and you're solving what maybe they didn't even know they needed.
Because they can understand and interpret your intention.
That's it. Yep.
This is why intention matters.
Now you're well-intentioned in their eyes. They see you as actually wanting to help them.
Mm-hmm. Intention is so big. Intention will get you so far. Like, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, you don't even need to have good words to say. You can say a lot of wrong things, weird things, overshare. Like, you can do a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as you have like good intention and genuine, authentic seeking to understand, that'll get you so far, because they know that you're trying to help, and you have the conviction that what you're giving them is going to be the solution to their problem.
Yeah. I think the easiest hack to getting somebody to believe that you care about them is to actually care about them. Like,
wait, no, Daniel, I wanted a hack. I wanted something fake so I could trick people.
Yeah, sales is tricking people. No, sales is communicating value because I want to help you. So you're going to show them how what you have is actually going to help them in real life.
I think this is the problem with the English language in general is like we have so many words and yet not enough words.
Dude.
You know, like there should be more words for sales. Like I don't know what the word would be. I don't think there is a word, but
because we don't
sales means so many different things to different people in different contexts. So if I say sales, someone is like, your definition of sales is different than my definition of sales. Maybe off by a little bit, but it's still off. Someone else's might think it's just about used car salesmen. Someone else might be like, oh, they're actually talking about like these really high ticket, like multi-million software deals between B2B companies. And it's like, that's so different, you know?
Yeah.
But they're all using the same word.
Right.
But the dictionary and what that means is so different. It's like, why don't we have
that?
Like, you know, like the Greeks used to have like 12 words for love.
Right.
You know, and it's like, why don't we have that even now? Like even the word love in English language is a very prime example of this. I love ice cream. I love you. They're different.
You love me as much as ice cream?
Oh, no, I don't know about that, dude. Calm down.
Right, but it's like you can't compare the nuance of that without using other words around it.
Right.
To be like, I love you in this way or descriptive.
Well, that's
like,
yeah.
Well, that's where the other forms of communication come in.
That's
because you can build context.
Right. Absolutely right. That's where the other forms of communication come in. And that's also what I find so fascinating about the English language, like just from a linguistics standpoint. It's actually like very mathematical, like how like sentences and words are structured and things like that. It's super interesting. Like I think the movie Arrival kind of goes into it a little bit.
Movies.
Yeah, it's super good. So it's like you got these aliens coming in. And who are we going to try to like communicate with the aliens? Oh, we got to get like these super smart physicists and scientists and mathematicians, but we also got to get a linguist in there, right?
Sure.
And then they end up communicating not just with the aliens, but to each other as well. And it's like, oh, it's actually very mathematical. It ends up being like they're all based on the same principles, right? And so that's why they're able to even eventually communicate with the aliens is because they're all fundamentally based on the same principles, and you're just changing like internal dictionaries and contextual meanings. And that movie's interesting too because it goes into like how language influences how you think, and therefore how you perceive reality, and time and space and everything. That's wild.
Yeah,
we can definitely go down that rabbit hole sometime too. But what I want to say about the English language in general, what's super interesting about it is it's stupid inefficient. Like it's terrible in that regard, right? Like you got certain languages, like I don't know, maybe like French, I guess, or like a Romance language that's really good at describing certain things. Right? As in you have like certain words that have like a whole context of cultural meaning behind it. Or I know like Japanese has a lot of these words as well, where it's like you got specific word. Like let's just use like a quick example of like ikigai. We talked about that on another episode.
Yeah.
Has a whole concept behind it. Kaizen, like continual improvement. But there's more to that. There's like an idea of not becoming invincible, but becoming unstoppable. You know, and there's a whole like you're pursuing a greater, higher purpose through that just simple word of Kaizen, right? So there's a whole like description behind this thing that requires cultural context and description to understand it with a simple word. So English is super bad at that because it doesn't really have that, right? But the reason why English is so prevalent and why I think it actually is a really good choice for like a universal worldwide language is because it's versatile. You know, it's kind of like the catch-all language of all languages, right? Like I can describe anything, any kind of concept from like an emotional concept, a romantic concept, a philosophical concept, to a very technical scientific concept, all with the same language. It just takes a lot of like inefficiencies, right? Like a single word, one language might be really good and structured around that because that's what they're culturally optimized for, right? English can get there, but it's going to take a paragraph. Like English can get anywhere, but it's just going to take a little more, you know? So there's a kind of a cost benefit analysis for what you are trying to communicate and what the purpose of that is. And then English is not good at any one thing, but it can do everything, right? So it's able to communicate very versatilely across different ideological contexts because it's just the way it's structured and then how it like works. It's almost like a bulldozer approach. Like it'll get the job done, it just won't be efficient.
What do you think makes it that way? Do we have more words than other languages? Do we have like more ways we can rotate in different words together, the combination of words?
I think it's a little bit of that, where the way that our language works is very mathematically structured, and it doesn't have as much like freedom. Almost like it puts these like constraints within the language and what the words mean, so that you kind of have to use them like Lego blocks. But Legos are great because you can build anything you want, right? But you're still limited to like an individual Lego block. Whereas like something like French or Japanese might be like a lump of clay.
Interesting. Well, I almost see some other languages as more structured and constrained than English. Like, you take Spanish for sake, 'cause that's the only, like...
I'm completely speaking on without enough linguistic context to speak as an expert. I just want to like make that clear.
Definitely.
I have enough general mathematical understanding of language to understand these a little bit, but I don't have like actual specific.
And to be fair, like our bias is 100% like English. We've grown up speaking English.
Right.
Like that's where it comes from.
It's just my best guess of why I think it is the way it is.
Fair. We should bring somebody on here who's like a linguist. Like,
yeah, for sure.
Just like, I am relatively proficient in Spanish. I'm rustier now than I used to be. I used to be relatively conversational with it, but Spanish, like, there's rules to the language, and those are the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the way each letter sounds when you say it is the same. It's consistent. No matter what word that letter is in, it's going to sound the same way, no matter what. English, certain letters are going to sound different depending on the word that it's in.
Right. That's
like, it's actually more moldable. There's more variability in the English language, I think. Like, with something like Spanish, you have different endings to different words to mean, like if I have this, right? Okay. I would say yo tengo, right? Like, I have this thing. But if you have it, I would say tú tienes. Like, the end of the word changes, and it changes depending on who it's talking about. So there's a reference point attached to the word, so that if there's context built into it. Whereas I don't know if English has that on a word-to-word basis. You have this, I have this, they have this. It's the same thing, so they need the they, you, him in front of it.
I think
so. There's less context built into each word, but I think we have maybe more words that we can describe it with. Because if you can just take, like,
because you don't need that as much if you have more words to come.
Like the word laugh, laugh, right? Those letters in that order are spelled that way. But if you take the word through, through, it's now changed. The way you say it is different.
Yeah, like through and tough. What's up with
the
that?
Exact same. Like, by definition of the rule, they should sound the same, but they don't.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. English breaks a lot of its own quote-unquote rules. And I wonder,
it's weird,
if the reason why you interpret Spanish as being more rigid is just because you're operating at more like a basic conversational level, so you only had like rules to operate off of. Whereas like English, you just have whatever. Like, you're so masterful at the language that you can kind of see all these different breaking.
That's fair, because with Spanish too, like, there's a lot of slang and there is a lot of like, you change stuff
like,
up. And
I think of it like if I were talking to like a kindergartner, because like that's, I mean, you probably got to a little bit beyond a kindergartner level, but like that's probably the maximum I got to as like a Spanish speaker in school. Like, I could talk, but it was like a kindergartner, like a toddler, pretty much. You know,
right.
Like, and thinking about a toddler is like, they don't have a ton of time under the belt, they don't have a ton of experience. They have to follow the rules because it's all they know.
Yeah.
And they don't know better to be able to know when and how they can mold the rules. But that is a good point about English having these weird.
And I mean, my, I guess, reference point with Spanish too is only talking to the people that I personally had contact with and was speaking with in Spanish or whatever, as opposed to somebody who lives in Mexico or Spain or something like that. You're immersed in the culture. Your reference point of that language is probably a little bit different. My reference point of that language is still in America, just speaking to people who speak Spanish.
That's interesting. Do you think, because a lot of the languages I was talking about are that might have like one word meaning a whole thing because of the cultural context. Do you think English is kind of devoid of that because it's almost become culturally agnostic, right?
Fascinating.
So there's not like a strict culture behind the English language now. At least that's how I interpret it. Because you look at something like Shakespearean Old English, maybe there's some examples of that there, because there's have this whole context of history of how that language is spoken within that time.
Right.
So that probably means some stuff, you know? And there are absolutely some examples of this too. Like you have slang in English as well, and certain words that mean more than other words as well. But a lot of them are based on like small like inside jokes and subcultures, not like a larger, like you wouldn't be able to communicate that to an English speaker in a different country. It would be like a very, very small niche thing.
It's like a dialect at that point.
Yeah, it's like a dialect. Like I wish I could come up with a good example now, but number one, I can't. Number two, it probably wouldn't make sense.
Well, and it could be like it's like a dialect, right? Where, my wife's family is from Sicily, right? And Sicily is a small island off the southern coast of Italy, right? It's technically Italy,
right?
But they speak basically a different language than like the main Italy, and even within that country, like region to region, they can't understand each other as well because the dialect is so different. So it's like the base language is the same, but the dialects are so different that now their words mean different things. They have slightly different words for different things. So that ability to communicate is now slightly impaired.
English has been almost intentionally like
universalized,
standardized to be able to be a universal language.
I think so.
So that I can write a scientific paper, so that I can write a joke, a comedy with it, so I can write a romantic novel, so I can communicate all these different things anyone through the same medium. Even if it's inefficient, it's versatile and it will get the job done.
English is like the MVP, like minimum viable product of like language.
Right. I mean, it's kind of like the ultimate like jack of all trades, like Renaissance man of language kind of thing.
Yeah.
But almost like not enough. Right. Because it doesn't really do anything super well.
Well, it does do some things pretty well, because obviously, like, if this many people have been using English for this long, and it's like it's spread so far that it does a good job at most everything that it does. But it's also so frustrating and weird, and I'm sure it's even more so for people trying to learn it with all these random rules that it has, and then it just breaks its own rules, and everything is like words are sight words. You can't really. It's hard to sound everything out. It's like really weird.
Here, I just thought of a quick little like context subcultural example too. Like if I say like oh, I got like jumped by these guys, but I like Jackie Chan them with my jacket, or I found like a ladder, something like that. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what.
Like I Jackie Chan'd them. Like I'm using Jackie Chan as a verb now.
Yeah.
And no one's gonna understand that unless they have the context of watching at least 3 or 4 Jackie Chan movies.
Yeah.
To know like, oh, he uses weird things with props. He hits people with ladders. He takes his jacket off and chokes people out. Like he does all these cool little ninja things with environmental aspects, and that's kind of like what that word means. So actually that is completely. That's a completely a subcultural example of the English language having a single word been verbified.
Yeah. That has so much context around it.
It has so much context around it, but with a single word that we can communicate because we have shared context and subcultural experiences.
Yeah. But if you tell somebody who's never seen a Jackie Chan movie, I Jackie Chan'd him, they're gonna be like,
"What, dude?" English is also really, really well.
You have to share that. You gotta have that shared.
I think I rescind my Lego block analogy with English. I think it's actually more like a little bit of a. It's like Lego blocks, but it's like those little dummy Lego blocks. Maybe like a little bit of clay in there too. Because you can like verbify anything. I think that's actually super fascinating from a linguistic standpoint, because all these grammar Nazis out here are so particular about making sure you use the exact word, the exact pronunciation, and the exact like
apostrophes,
grammar
place.
Yeah, all these little technical things.
Right.
But fundamentally, it doesn't actually matter because the language did its job. The point of language is to get idea from my head to your head.
Yeah.
Grug's head to Greg's head.
And if do that, good.
Yeah. It's like that Office clip, like, why use more words when, like, less word do trick? It's basically that.
For real, it's more efficient that way.
It's 100% more efficient. And it's like, that's why I used to be like a very big stickler for grammar or whatever, because ego, whatever. But I've stopped doing that because it just doesn't.
There's diminishing returns.
Huge diminishing returns. It is literally completely outside of the realm of the purpose of language.
Yes.
Right?
Obviously, you have to have some level of grammatical structure, or else it doesn't convey meaning accurately enough.
Right.
But if you go too far, it's
just
necessary.
It's just like you have to have some sort of standardization to be able to teach it. I think, at least with the way the American education system works now. But then also, it's just kind of like different mathematical rules. Like as long as you understand, like people like order of operations, right? It's the same kind of thing. Like, that's super duper helpful if you don't know what you're doing. But once you know what things do, you don't really pay attention to that because it's so obvious to you, like, what you should operate first, what you should say first, what should go before then. Because you just understand it better. You know, right?
You know the principles.
Like, in the same kind of thing, like if you have like a X minus Y, it's like, well, you know what those symbols and operators mean, so you can also have like negative X plus Y, or sorry, negative Y plus X. You know, it's the same meaning, but I now change the order. So I can manipulate things because I understand what they mean more.
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, you convey. Well, that's at the point of language, right? It's conveying an idea, and if you get that idea across accurately to the other person, it doesn't really matter how you did it. You achieved the goal.
And this is why like verbification is such a funny thing to me, because it's so incorrect. It's so not real, but it is. But it works so well, and you can do it with anything. Like and there's some context, like turning a noun into a verb. There's always some context to like what that noun is and what it does and how it exists, its purpose, that you can connect to. Oh, if someone made a verb, that means they were doing that thing, you know.
Yeah.
And that's such an interesting, thing. Like,
yeah,
I love it.
You just big brained that.
I just big brained that. That's not a verb, but it is.
It is now.
It is now.
Yeah, that's, dude. Yeah, language is crazy, but again, it's about communicating an idea, and we've touched on this already, but I think it's so important to just kind of rehash the idea that you have to share a common playing field of perspective to know what each other's talking about, so that you're on the same page about things.
Do you think that's why, like, public speaking is a lot of people's worst fears, is because they don't know if there's some shared context, like there's shared experience?
Possibly. I also just think that's a completely different topic of conversation, in terms of like they have a presupposition of what other people are going to think about them, or what they think other people think about them, and so they're just afraid to put themselves out there because they have already made up the other people's minds about what they think.
Right.
And so that's probably not necessarily just a language thing, but I do think that might be part of it.
Interesting, yeah. Because you ask a bunch of people, it's like a lot of people will say like public speaking is like their number one fear. Like they'll put it above dying. Like they'd rather die than public speak.
They say that, but
they probably won't,
because that's hardwired.
And also number one fear. Well, that also, or something close to it. That also brings into question too, is like how people are interpreting death.
Well, because here's, interestingly, you could pose it like this too. It's like they fear public speaking more than dying in their mind, but really they fear public speaking because they don't want to humiliate themselves, so that they will be ridiculed and pushed out by their tribe and left to die.
It's basically,
it comes back to that.
It's 100% the same.
So that fear is rooted in the fear of exile and the fear of dying.
Monk's brain is 100% just afraid of death. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Like if you get rejected, if you say something stupid and you get rejected by the tribe, you can't survive alone, which is why communication is so important in the beginning, in the first place.
Right.
But you're afraid to do it.
But that's only why you're afraid of public speaking, is because you're afraid of dying, which is weird. It's like, I'd rather die than do this, but I'm afraid of this because I'm going to die.
Right.
It's like,
but I think it's a really important thing to talk about too, because like, if you think of anyone who's like you regard as like a good communicator, they're public speaking, because that's the only way you hear about them.
You have to speak to the public.
You have to speak.
So
it's an incredibly important skill to have if you want to be a good communicator. So I don't know, I would consider you a pretty good public speaker. Is there any like kind of major like things or takeaways or stories you have about public speaking and how you kind of got better at it?
Well, I think something to think about in public speaking is just because we've been talking a lot about communication and it's relating to people. It's like you have to be good at making something universally relatable. Not universally relatable, but relatable to multiple people at once. Because when you're talking to another individual, you have to know their perspectives and then relate it exactly to that the blind person.
But it might not match right with the guy next to him.
But in the if I'm describing the color yellow at a public speech, like there might be blind people in the audience, deaf people, people who can see, people, all those things. So you have to be able to communicate things in more than one way, so that it becomes not universally, because you're not talking about to everyone, but that particular niche of people who are there all have to understand what you're saying at some level.
Right.
So there's definitely that. In terms of getting over the fear of it, like, I might not be the best person to ask about that, only because I've personally never been overly afraid of it. I've always kind of enjoyed it a little bit. I'm nervous. Like, even now when I even just do a presentation in front of like 10 or 20 people, like, it's still like, but I'm nervous because I care about it and I care about like doing a good job. But I've always enjoyed it, so I might not be the best person to ask about that particular question. But in terms of just getting good at speaking in front of people, like eliminating expectation in general of just how it's going to go, what people are going to think of you, anything like having an expectation going into it of what's going to happen, how it's going to go, how people are going to think of you. If anything is different between your expectation and reality, you're automatically disappointed. Yeah, automatically like, I did a terrible job. That was the worst thing ever.
Not just that, I think it also like throws you off too. And this is why like I think scripts are such a dangerous thing, is because if you try to script it or plan out your speech exactly like, I'm going to write it exactly what I'm going to say, I'm going to practice it, I'm going to rehearse it, I'm going to say it, is because things never go exactly how you plan, the chances that you're going to be able to actually get through your script perfectly are so low. But your entire, like a huge part of your mental capacity is taken up by making sure I say the right words, which is leaving a very, very small portion to like connecting with the audience, actually presenting, actually providing value to what they need to hear, not what you want to say, right? Perfect. And that's a huge thing too, because like I remember all through high school, I don't know, I'm a little bit different than you. I used to like hate public speaking, like especially phones. I used to be terrified of phones. Like calling people on the phone was terrifying. I don't know why. And to be fair, it's still a little bit, but like I can do it. Like I can cold call. Like I've done that, But when I was growing up, it's like even like a family member, like someone I know, like a friend or whatever, I was like, oh, phone. I don't know. Some sort of like weird monkey brain disconnect. If I can't see their face, I'm scared. Darkness. I don't know.
Yeah.
Unknown.
Interesting.
But even in like public speaking, either giving a presentation in class or just getting up and speaking, things like that, I would always be afraid of, which is interesting because I always used to say like, oh, I don't like speaking on a stage or in front of people, but I'm okay like performing and doing stuff, So like I would always do like martial arts demos or tournaments and things like that. It was totally fine.
I think
I generally wasn't super afraid of that, but I was afraid of speaking.
You know why?
Why?
Or here's why I think. Is because you knew that you were able to give them what they expected to see.
Ooh.
Whereas just going to talk to somebody on the phone, you don't know what they're expecting, so you don't know if you're going to disappoint them, you don't know if you're going to make a fool of yourself, whatever. It's like you knew you were confident in your ability to perform whatever you were about to perform, and you knew that's what they were there to see.
It's like
they had
a script, like a practiced speech, basically. Like if I'm performing something, usually it wasn't always freestyle. Like sometimes it was or whatever.
Right.
But even then, it's like I know what I'm doing.
Correct.
And that's why like practice is obviously kind of like the main thing if you want to just get better. But I think too, as I kind of like went through high school, I would still do like rehearsed practiced speeches.
Mm-hmm.
And I would basically practice it. And when I do it, I would try to get exactly that. I can tell you my memories of a lot of the speeches and presentations I gave in like high school and actually even through early college, I don't remember anything I was talking about to the audience. I don't remember the audience. I don't really remember anything like that. All I remember was me feeling relieved after every sentence I said, knowing that I said it right.
Yeah.
There was a complete disconnect. I know I didn't impact them hardly at all.
Sure.
And I remember pretty vividly the last time I ever scripted a presentation was, so I was working in a research group at Berkeley, and like every week during our weekly meetings, the first part we'd have some people, they would go through like some new journal publications for the week, and they pick a few that they thought were interesting, and they were just supposed to kind of like talk about them and just kind of like give like a short summary of like what they learned or whatever. Like it's honestly pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Like looking back at it now, I'm like, dude, it's super easy. Like, what was I doing? But even as like I think I was like a sophomore or something. Even like as like a sophomore in college, I was like way overanalyzing it. I'll like write out these like little summaries of everything because I wanted to like make sure I got everything there, because I was like, right, expectations. Like I had to like impress them. I had to make sure they knew that I knew what I was talking about. Make sure they know I read the papers, or I pretended to read the papers or whatever. So I remember I had this like little script that I was like almost reading off of as I was going through that, and it went terrible. Like I was trying to go through the paper and I didn't really know what I was talking about, and I was like basically trying to like remember what I was trying to say, plus like little notes I wrote, and it was like this like, struggle to just try to keep everything together on my end, and I completely lost the value that I was trying to like. I don't even remember what I was talking about. I just completely lost the value. I was trying to like get these people to understand the papers that I read.
Yeah.
Right. And then like when someone would ask me a question, I didn't know, because all I knew was my script. I didn't actually know what the paper was talking about.
Yeah.
Right. And basically after that, I was like, this is terrible. Like this sucks. Like I'm never doing this again.
It's just, yeah, so dumb.
So do you just want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I think so. Two things that can help a lot of time, or at least I think can help with that sometimes, are treat it like who you're about to talk to wants to hear what you have to say.
That's
like they're there because they want to know what you have to tell them. And that's pretty big, because like,
can I tell you why that's pretty big?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's really big. And this is also why like it actually relates a lot back to sales as well, and why like cold calling and door to door is like I consider that like the hardest version of public speaking. And it's exactly what you said. Like, when you're giving a speech, no one wants you to be bad. Everyone wants a good speech, right? And they're on ready for you. They're on your team. You've never been to a speech and be like, I hope this guy sucks. Unless you're at a speech competition and like they're your competition, but like realistically, like you want to hear a good speech, you want to hear a bop, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe a presentation or like something in school or business or something like that. That might be a little bit more high pressure, because there might be some people who be like, oh, like hope the numbers are good, or I'll be present. There's a little bit more like judgment and expectation associated with that, so it gets a little bit more tricky.
Yep.
And then you got like cold call and door to door, where you're like basically trying to sell someone something on their door, unexpected, that they probably don't want, and you have to be very, very intentional about the value that you're trying to create and really convicted in that, right? Because door to door, people actively want you to be bad. I've worked door to door for almost a year now, and like people actively want you to be bad. Some people straight up, they open the door and they'll tell you like F off, they'll cuss you out, get on my property, did you not read the sign, like all these kinds of things. They don't like you. Why? Because you are wearing a hat and a little badge and walking up to their door unannounced, and they think that they know what you're doing, right? So they already think you're out to get them. They already think that they don't have, they assume your intentions.
Yeah.
Of, I'm trying to get you to buy something that you don't need because I benefit off of it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to swindle you or sleaze like that, you know? So that's why it's super hard, is because you have to break down that barrier and do all these like weird, like sometimes psychological tricks, quote unquote, to just kind of get through their little like monkey reptile brain up into their limbic system and prefrontal cortex to actually get to understand what you're saying. So you can actually then pull your intention across and be like, hey, no, this is really important, right? And that's actually just a very interesting thing that I've noticed in my own journey, getting good at public speaking and now doing like door-to-door sales. Like basically doing to a relatively high level the thing that I was most afraid of. You know, and that journey has taught me so much.
Totally. I think another like useful part to that is, if you're going to talk about something you know, like, or at least make it seem like you know about it. But the easiest way to do that is actually talk about something you know, right? Because if you talk about
a skill, and most of that skill and confidence comes from competence.
Yes.
Like that's just straight up, unless you're really good.
No, totally. If you know you're talking about it, you're going to convey so much more confidence and composure and conviction in it, because you know about it, you believe it. And if you actually know about something, then you can just talk about it off the cuff, because you don't need notes, because you didn't cram studying for it the night before. You've been studying for years. You know this stuff. So people can ask you questions, you'll be able to give answers, and you can just talk about it.
Dude.
And so, like, hack to being able to just wing speeches is just talk about stuff you know about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not giving a speech on something that you really know much about, if you like, I don't know anything about this, but I have to give a speech on it, it's like, the better question is, why are you giving a speech on it? Are you really qualified to? Are you the best person to do that?
Sometimes that can be a good like exercise. Like, I don't know. I've never been to like a Toastmasters thing, but like I don't know. I'm sure that it's a pretty good exercise. Like, oh, like give a little talk about like a bonsai, or like someone hands you a cup and like, oh, give a speech about a cup.
Yeah,
it's like that's so random, but it's a good exercise to be able to just use all the tools at your disposal, your inflections, your confidence, your poise, your composure, to be able to communicate something interesting about a cup, or a tree, or whatever,
Yeah.
So I think that's cool too. And for me, and this is actually kind of like what was a pretty big unlock for me in just public speaking in general, is like public speaking, because you're talking to like monkeys in suits, basically. Like let's be real, we're all just like monkeys. Our brain and our hardware and a lot of our software too is like stopped evolving when we're hunter-gatherers. Like we're primarily primal primates, right? Like tribal, primal,
hunter-gatherer. Like that,
right?
Still there.
So we work how they worked. They told stories around a fire. That's how they taught. That's how they learned.
Straight up.
So prioritizing stories was a huge unlock for me in terms of just public speaking, because if you think about it, like, and again, going back on your point of talking about what you know about, all their stories that you have, your own experiences or anecdotes, those. You can tell the same story in 5 minutes. You can tell the same story in 10 minutes. You can tell the same story in 30 minutes if you really wanted to, adding in, taking out, moving around details.
Yeah.
Making things faster, slower, whatever.
Yeah. You
can tell the same story in many, many different ways, right? So if you structure your speech instead of a script, but now you just have a little string of stories, and like this story has this point, and that leads into this story, and that has this story, and then there's this other story that uses both of the points to make a bigger point, and that's your message.
Yeah.
Like that little like 2-3 dot little like flow chart of what my speech looks like, that could be a 10-minute speech, that could be a half-an-hour speech, that could be an hour-long speech. Because I know the stories, and I know the points that I'm trying to get across. I have an objective, and I have my stories. I don't need a script.
Right.
I can just talk about it. And it's going to be structured in a way that actually conveys value, because I've decided what that value is going to be. And I've picked and chosen my stories that have certain points and certain examples. And you don't need to memorize those because you've experienced them.
Yeah.
Right? So that was a huge unlock for me. And now I feel very, very confident just giving a speech, because I know how to do it. Right? It is a trainable skill, but it also just comes from the understanding of like, stop trying to do what you think and other people have told you to do. Just understand what, like the intention behind what you're trying to do. You're trying to teach someone something. How are you going to teach them something? Tell a story, because that's how humans learn. That's pretty much it right there. Like, I would say that's honestly like, I don't want to like put any of this on a pedestal, but that's like a small little like master class on like just giving a speech, I would say. I really believe that.
And I think like one of the highest level communication skills is basically condensed story, which is an analogy.
It's like a condensed story.
Simplify. The simplest way you can convey the most meaning is through an analogy, because what we talked about earlier, an analogy is a way to convey something that you know to somebody who doesn't know anything about it in a way that they do understand. So those dots just not connect.
You literally bring something that you're trying to teach them that they're about, and then you're literally reaching in and pulling something that they have context on, and then just like, oh, it's just like that.
And they completely, then they understand it immediately, right? Because you're just referencing it on their level.
It's just like a switchboard, like an operator like switchboard. It's like ding bong,
analogy. Like if you can be good at coming up with analogies, that's where
you have to be good at understanding the person.
That's what I was about to say. That's where understanding where they're coming from comes in. That's also where having a broad understanding of different fields of study, different broad knowledge base, lots of skills, gives you that advantage, because now you can make analogies about a lot of different things. You really understand a lot of different things at a strong level, so you can make these analogies. You can relate to lots of different people. Your communication skills through the roof.
Like all of the value and the reasons why you should be a Renaissance man or a polymath or whatever that we've all talked about, like all those are great and all and super valuable. But like if that was just for the sheer purpose of now I have more things to bring in communication with people to make better analogies, that's worth it alone almost.
Totally.
Because you can communicate better, which is the fundamental
you have more tools,
skill of everything.
And now be more accurate with your communication, and Dude, well, some people like really like analogies, but some people kind of trash analogies sometimes because they're like, oh, it's not exactly like that. It's like, that doesn't matter. That's not the point.
Those are the right and people who get you on like there versus there.
Yeah.
All the grammar Nazis and like, so you misspelled one letter. It's like, dude, that's not a word. It's like, dude, I made it a word.
Because I conveyed value with it. There you are. Community meaning with it.
You understood what I was talking about, right? Cool. It worked.
An analogy that like, it's a very common analogy, but it's one that I use a lot is like with like a background in like fitness or like when I'm training people or just talking about fitness or anything body related in general is the analogy of the body and comparing it to like a car. Because a lot of people drive cars, they have some base level of understanding of how a car works. It's got wheels and engine and you sit in it, right? Like at some level they understand that because it's very relatable to a lot of people. Body, a lot more complex, a lot more going on. Maybe they don't understand it as well. And there's so much you can compare. There's so many similarities. I'm also like obsessed with cars. Like that's like one of my biggest passions in life is like cars and stuff. And so I like to make that analogy, but I mean, you can relate different parts of the body to different parts of the car. Like, you know, your feet are kind of like the tires or the wheels are the only thing that like touches the ground. You know, you can relate it to like engine, the suspension, like different parts of the car. You can relate to different parts of the person, how it works, like brakes, accelerating, steering, like whatever. And then a lot of people will kind of like say, oh, that's terrible because we're not like a car. Like we're human and we can adapt and change and all these things. And it's like, yes, sure. But that's not the point. The point of an analogy is to convey something
specifically,
very specific to somebody who doesn't currently understand it in a way that they do understand. So then they understand what you're talking about. I'm not saying you're a car, right? This isn't Pixar animation cars. Like ka-chow. Okay. Just ka-chow. That's all I have to say about that. But basically also like, it is also very useful to make the analogy that we are like a car so that you can point out the differences, so that the differences are relevant because they do understand a car and now they understand humans a little more because you compare it. So like one of the biggest differences between like a human and a car is our ability to heal and adapt ourselves, right? If I'm like, okay, your ankle that you got sprained, it's like the suspension on a car, like it's like springs and stuff like that, right? Whatever. If you break a spring on a car, you have to go do surgery.
Get a new one, yeah.
Right? You have to go replace it. Boom, pop, duck. And your ankle, hopefully, you don't have to do surgery for everything. Like that's not how we can heal, we can adapt, we can be more robust to stress, things like that. You can do that with a car. You have to upgrade a lot of parts. We can do that automatically. We have that ability, right? We're a living object. We're a living thing. But that makes more sense because now you have the contrast between that and a car. So the analogy is useful on both ends, whether you're actually comparing it or contrasting it, right? That's why it's so useful because it's, again, you're going into their world, something they understand.
100%.
If somebody doesn't understand a car very well, I'm not going to go that deep in a car analogy.
Right.
I'm going to find something that they can relate to.
100%.
That's the biggest piece of an analogy is something they can relate to. That's why it's so powerful.
That 100% is exactly why it's so powerful because it's such a specific comparison on like a specific aspect. You can make those quote unquote stretch comparisons for specific things because yeah, of course we're not a car, but like you're not saying you're a car. I'm saying this particular part of your body is like this particular part of a car. You know, so it's the ability to specify specific things at a time within context.
Yeah.
And exactly with the comparison and also be able to point out the contrast between them as well. It's such a useful tool and the format of an analogy is just a really good way to package that tool of specific comparison and contrasting. That's kind of what I would say like an analogy is. Contextual, like specific, comparing and contrasting within a relevant contrast.
Relatable.
Yeah, relatable contrast. And then you just put it packaged into a little analogy form and it's just like a nice little like handy dandy like bam, screwdriver, pocket knife, done, you know?
100%.
No, analogies are a great tool because you're exactly right. It's a compact story. It is fundamentally just right to the heart, right to the jugular of what a story means for a human, pretty much, right? Like, you don't have to go through all the structures like hero's journey, this, that, climax, resolution stuff, whatever, but it kind of does. Like, it's all that kind of compacted down into one. It's really cool.
Absolutely. 100%. And communication, man, I mean, that's like, again, that's the basis of how we interact with people. There's a reason that's the base root word of community and communication are the same thing, right? It's like, that's how you create a community is through communication. Like, that's how you build and foster, and that's how it interacts. That's how a community works, is based on the communication. So it's like, if you're going to pick one skill to get good at, that's going to help literally everything in your life for the rest of your life, and communication might be that skill.
Well, absolutely. Because if you just look at like because we talk about leverage a lot here, like what is going to give you the most output in whatever direction you want to go with the least amount of input, right? Communication is a very high leverage thing, right? Because if you look at all the different types of leverage, like labor leverage, capital leverage, like code, things like that, like all these different things, they're all really just communication, right? Like we should probably actually go specifically through each one maybe another time, but like just for example, like labor leverage, like being able to use other people. Like I say one thing, like, oh, go build this thing, but I'm not only doing it myself, like would I have an army of 100 people doing it for me, right? That's a lot of leverage. But I communicated value in why they should do it, right? Mm-hmm. I'm communicating value in the mission, what we're building, right? And so they'll do the same thing. I'm communicating that value, and that's actually causing change. Same thing with like capital. There's this common like sentiment that, you know, realistically, like people vote with their dollars, right, for what they care about, which is very, very true. I think what you spend money on, it really shows me your priorities, right? That's from like a micro scale capital leverage. But if you like it, like, you know, like a big like investment bank or take a loan on something like that, so you're able to leverage a little bit of money to get a loan for a lot of money to go buy like a business or something, right? Or that's like capital leverage. But you're also just really communicating. Not only do you have to communicate value to the bank and the business owner that you're trying to interact with, but you're also using the money as a medium of exchange of a value, right? So you're really saying that you care about this thing because you're putting money on the line, and you're communicating to the bank that you care about this thing because you're putting your own money on the line to get the loan, right? So like that's another like mode of leverage that is fundamentally just communication. And then if you look at like the last example I'll give is like just code, like that's like probably one of the highest like code in media is like the highest like perceived leverage nowadays, because you can build something once, license it, or sell it 1 million times, right? So it's just one little input, infinite potential output, right? So it's this huge discrepancy of leverage. But if you write a piece of code, what are you doing? You're writing a language.
Communicating.
You're communicating with your little like wizard spells to this magic rock in a computer that, you know, you basically like put lightning in a rock and it thinks now, and you're communicating with your little magic wizard spells. Like, it's just a level of communication to the sentient rock, basically, to make something happen that you can then sell to other people, you know? So it's all just layers and layers of communication. So you're right. Communication is the fundamental skill of conveying value and transmitting energy. Like, really, that's really what it comes down to.
Definitely. Everything is communication. Another way of saying it is everything is sales.
I love that.
Depends on how you define sales, obviously.
Why we need more words? Because that's why we even have to like, be careful. We have to have the caveat of we're not going to use that word.
So you would say everything is communication.
Right. That's fundamentally what it is. Like, sales is communication, but then again, like, communication is sales, because what is sales fundamentally is like, yeah, you're communicating value and you're guiding people along and influencing them to make the best decisions for them. You know, like, your job as a salesman is not to get someone to buy. Your job as a salesman is to help them decide what the best choice is for them.
Correct.
To achieve the goals that they want. Yep. To resolve their pain, to solve their problems.
Absolutely.
So from that perspective, like, yeah, no, like, everything is sales. Like, that's really how you convey value in the world, because you're communicating it. You're communicating, you're telling people why they should care about it.
Yeah, and that's why my definition of sales I like is like, you're just using communication effectively to communicate value. Like, it's communication.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is.
That's all it ever is. 100%.